Welcome back to Pixel Project Radio. This is part 2 of our coverage on 1000xRESIST. Part 2, final part. If you found this episode before you found part 1, do go check that out first. We're going to get right into it, starting in Chapter 4 and going all the way to the end of the game. I'm joined again by Matt and Dave. Thanks for joining me again. How are you two?
Good.
Doing great. Yeah, good to be back. Good to see you again, Matt.
Yeah, good to see y'all too. Excited to keep chatting about this wacky, weird, and I think incredible game.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff we talked about in part 1 was a lot of like, this is going to be important later, so put a pin in this. So those pins start coming out in part 2. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get right into it. Let's not waste any time. There's still quite a fair bit to cover. So we're starting up here again in Chapter 4. This is occurring right at the All-Mother's birthday. So all of the clones, all of the sisters sort of celebrate this day as a whole to give thanks to the All-Mother. It's sort of a religious occurrence here. And a new fixer has been graduated today too. And there's some time to mingle at the party, but we don't have a lot of time because an occupant attacks for the first time.
Brace. Occupant activity detected above. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is an active occupant situation. All sisters to muster in the underground immediately.
The sirens begin to blare. Many are falling and dying during this, cracking their masks, falling. One sister falls onto another and snaps her neck by accident. It's mass chaos. And in the middle of this, Noah decides that it's time for her communion. She is the last one to need a communion out of the mandated sisters receiving them. She has a line about her function essentially coming after the fact at all times, to know, to gather knowledge, to prepare for the future. So during this time, she figures, let's do the communion now. This communion, I don't want to dwell on it for a ton of time because there's more to get to. This is the most abstract of the 3 sisters with whom we commune. And it focuses on learning how the occupants communicate. They communicate, this race of occupants, they communicate through collective memory. So they can only reference things that have happened in the past, and that is how they communicate their ideas. What I found really clever about this is that it creates this sort of Ouroboros within the writing of the game, wherein the school scenes that these occupants are referencing seem to have been written with the occupants in mind, but in reference to the occupants, and then vice versa. The occupants seem to have been written with the school scenes in mind. I thought it was really clever to have them communicate in this way.
Yeah, I didn't pick up on like that these were quotes from much earlier in the game because this is the part where you have to go through and do a little bit of like puzzling. Like they give you a prompt and you have to pick the right response to move the conversation forward and kind of like unlock the next part of the communion. So this was just kind of like blind guessing on my part until it was like, I kind of see what they're doing here. And if I like really squint at these lines, I can, because they're really cryptic. The language is really cryptic here. So it's not like, it's not super obvious what the right answer is right away. You do have to like think about them. But I didn't put together that this is referencing things from earlier in the game because I was very disoriented in the first couple chapters of this game.
There's a really easy trick to this. Like David mentioned, you're going to be referencing scenes that have happened earlier in the game. And the occupants or the occupant's essence will ask you a series of questions. And each question corresponds to the scene that you viewed. So you'll view 4 scenes in a row, and those questions will always be in that order. And each of these scenarios that you view will have one individual in it that says the same line over and over again, and it like refocuses the camera. And if you always pick that answer in the right order, you'll just go through the whole thing.
Right.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like a lot of other moments in this game, it doesn't really hold your hand. So you have to figure that out on your own. It doesn't really direct you to it. But then once you figure it out, it does feel fairly obvious. I do like that because for me, I was kind of in between you two. Like some of it, I felt like I was blind guessing, and then others, I was like, oh, I understand the correlation. But I did find it both annoying and fun at the same time, and I don't know what that says about the game. When talking to the occupant and trying to line stuff up, I thought it was interesting that if you screw up, then you have to do the whole, like it shunts you out and you have to do the whole conversation again. Not the whole series of them, but just that specific conversation. But I did like that, like Dave said, if you really squint, if you really think about it, even if you don't have the context, you can kind of figure out what's related. And I like when games do that, where they like kind of give you the context clues. And sometimes you can like big brain it and just be like, oh, and then feel kind of smart. It's like when I solve challenging puzzles in certain games and go, man, I'm so smart. And then, of course, you get smacked down right afterwards. But I like that kind of give and take of this section, especially because it's language, right? And it's so specifically focused on language, and like it has yet to be revealed, but this is only the tip of the iceberg of how the occupants communicate. Like we get a big revelation later of like what it really means when they're communicating with us, and I kind of really love that. And this is like the kind of thread starting to pull at that.
Right. There is more to be revealed from them. We do learn a few more tidbits here. We learn that they chose Earth and that they chose to inhabit a human form. And most importantly for this scene, we learn that Secretary, along with two other secretaries, identical little devices, were gifts from the occupants to Iris. This incenses Watcher, because to Watcher's mind, the occupants are still the enemy, and Secretary is one of them. Secretary claims not to remember this, but Iris doesn't really believe Secretary. So she grabs him and destroys him, bashes him on the ground, rips him apart. She only manages to break one of his sides off, but that's still,
that's all
one
she
less
needs.
Side. Yeah, right. And this chapter ends with Noah confronting Watcher. Watcher is spiraling. Fixer was right. She was just trying to help, and Iris killed her for it. Watcher killed her for it. Iris was on the occupant's side all along. Noah says many of the same sentiments to Watcher that we've heard before from Iris, from Iris's mom. We have it good, all things considered. We should keep in line because the All-Mother is essentially a god who knows what she could do. It's the same themes being shown here again.
I killed her. I killed her. Watcher, are you done? I said, are you done? Watcher, can I ask you something? Are you hungry? You're not listening. Are you cold, sick, hurt? Do you not have a room of your own, a mask to protect you, sisters who love you? Nowhere. We can't ignore this. What are you going to do about it? Well, I don't know. But we have to do something. Haven't you seen by now what she is capable of? Haven't you seen the lives of humans past? Our life is good. She protects us. She is a god in her own right.
And that's essentially her foot in the ground. She's saying that they have it good. There's no reason to shake things up. All of you Watchers are the same. At one point, Watcher will say, "What am I living for?" And Noah answers, "Who cares? Just be happy that you are living." And when she reveals that the previous Watcher ended up dying by suicide, she says, "Has anything changed?" "No, except she's dead, and now I have you." So Noah's pragmatism is on full display here. It's not worth causing a revolution if it's going to hurt those of us that are here.
And that continues, like, this is where we learn a little bit more about Noah, and she's one of my favorite sisters in the game, just because of what you said. Like, we have so many characters that are radicalized throughout the course of this story, and Noah is just kind of like picking her spots. This is what we're going to get upset about. This is what's not worth getting upset about. This is worth taking action. This is not worth taking action. We'll see later in the story how she navigates the changes that happen in the society. And she, like, her attitude that's on display in this chapter here is the first time that we really see how she navigates this entire thing. Like, I think I remember if you just said it a couple seconds ago, but we learned that, like, Noah was supposed to have gotten on the train, but she just never left. Like, she figured out, or she just decided that this is going to be best for me to be here, for whatever her motivations were. I'm sure there were several going at once, because she always is considering all the variables toward whatever decision she makes.
She also reveals here during this talk with Watcher that she knows more than the other sisters do. She lets that on. So it's entirely possible that she knows what awaits on the other side, and for that reason chooses not to go.
Yeah.
That, again, will become clearer on second plays and once we get towards the end of this. But that's what I think is going on. I think she knows what's waiting on the other side.
Yeah. There's also, so, like, correct me if I'm wrong, because this communion is, like you said, this is the most visually abstract and weird of all of them. This is the one where you're out on, like, that lake, and there's that rock, and there's, like, the occupants, like, semicircle headpiece, for lack of a better word, sticking out of that rock, and Nowhere's out there, and you're talking. And this is one of the most screenshotted quotes and scenes from the game.
Yeah.
And it, like, lays the foundation for what I think is one of the themes that this game sets up early on, and then kind of works with for a while, is that Nowhere says you must learn to live with the mistakes that you've made, as Watcher's having this crisis of faith, and everything that she thought was true is now turned upside down, and Nowhere's telling her how to move forward here. And that's something that we revisit over and over again, all the way up through, what happens at the end. This theme that you must learn to live with the mistakes you've made. You need to confront and acknowledge the past in order to move on. It's brought up here with Nowhere.
Yeah, and I think also this is the first time we see anything that could be considered politicized, kind of like trying to play, not necessarily both sides, but like trying to appease, right? The lines that you said, Rick, about you're not hungry, you have a home, you're not sick or hurt, right? It's like she's playing to the masses, like, accept what you have, don't worry about what you don't have. And this is like the very earliest inkling we get of there's more to Nowhere than just being Nowhere. Like, there could be ulterior motives, there could be that she knows something we don't. And this is only going to build as we go on. And I think it just comes from this pragmatism of, like, almost trying to be political, play to the strength, try and distract from revolution, as it were. And I think it's really fascinating how it's handled here, and then how it just continues to evolve with this character. I don't know if she's my favorite, but I think she motive-wise and, like, how she interacts with the sisters is the most interesting, the most engaging, because it's just she stands out, I think, a lot more than the other sisters, and very much a place and her decisions and what she does.
Yeah, it's always fascinating just to see, okay, this is how Nowhere has chosen to play this situation.
Yeah.
I didn't get the political bent on this just yet, but it does come into play later. And I think, whether intentional or not, this game does have a subtle observation about what the merits of I want to word this properly. What the merits of not jumping to the extreme ideologies are. I could have been unintentional, but I think it's there, and we don't see that anytime soon, though. Not yet. For now, the game catches us up to the opening in medias res scene. Watcher gets on the train. The trains are always coming, especially for Nowhere. Watcher just gets on one. And this is what takes us up to that beginning scene where Watcher kills Iris. So we have more context for that now. And we get to see the aftermath. Iris dies on the spot with Principal. Principal is there as well. She takes a second train that comes up, so she witnesses this whole thing. As she's dying, Iris is. She says how much she has missed and loved Principal, youngest. I think this is the first time she explicitly refers to Principal as youngest. And it's at this point Principal makes the announcement that All-Mother is dead, Watcher has killed her, and we get out of there using that slingshotting traversal method that we have in the communions. At this point, the game sort of restarts. It goes through the developer publisher screen. They've got blood dripping on the logos. I thought this was really out of place, and I don't think it should have been included. It's not really a con. I don't think it really added much. It was a little too creepypasta for me.
Yeah, it does remind me of a lot of those games that do meta things, like a Doki Doki Literature Club type of thing. And so I was like, oh, this game, I've seen this before. I've played these games before, but this game isn't one of those. It just has that reset. But we are resetting in a way, so it makes sense that they do the reset,
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think it's a bad thing that they included that.
Just the blood, where you're like, okay.
But we're set up for an interstitial here that largely begins the same as the opening of the game, where we're going to see Fixer off, but instead we are going to bury the original sisters, or excuse me, not bury, incinerate them. You're going around to find each of these sisters. This is reviving the motif of hide and seek and essentially telling them that they must burn. This is sort of the same theme that you and Matt have brought up, that both of you have brought up, this idea of confronting the past and moving beyond it. They have been buried, they have not been incinerated. So it's like they're still lingering there, but they have not been confronted. That's what this seemed to mean to me. I'm not sure. Did either of you have a different read on that?
It fits in my read, but when I was playing the game, I didn't make the connection with this particular scene. But the way that you laid it out makes sense, that in order for this society to move on, the All-Mother's dead, we're obviously moving in a new direction with the way that things work in our society. So it makes sense that they would confront this lingering thing from the past, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's so hard. I wouldn't say hard. Hard's the wrong word. It's so interesting to revisit this game this way after reading tons of discussion in several Discords, talking to you guys about it just offline, and then now also going beat by beat, because there's this blend of like, did I see that? Or does it just make sense now that Rick is pointing it out or Dave's pointing it out? And I take that as a positive. I think that speaks to the intricacies of this story. And that, I mean, even both of you saying in our group chat that when you restarted it up from the beginning just to check out the first couple chapters, kind of see how much it connects, and like some of it has direct connection to the tail end of the game and to peak moments in the game. And I think it makes this story kind of circular in a way, like just to better understand it the more you discuss it. And I mean, that's why we're doing something like this. And I love that about it.
And, this speaks to something that I said on the Pentiment episode, which if you're listening to this in real time, you're going to be very confused because that hasn't come out yet. I'm Billy Pilgrim. I'm Slaughterhouse-5ing this right now. I'm unstuck in time. But I was talking with Nick during the Pentiment episode, and with this show, this show has now been quote-unquote revived after the hiatus. I'm trying to be better about walking this tightrope, where on one hand, I do want to not be bogged down in summation and make more room for discussing these big picture ideas, narrative, the analysis of the game, of the work. On the other hand, and I'm saying this backwards in how I said it in Pentiment, but on the other hand, there is a part of I really like keeping that beat by beat summary. One, for folks who haven't played the game or don't have an interest, they just want the experience. That's great. I think that's not how I choose to approach this kind of thing, but some people do, and that's great for them. But for the other folks who have played this at least once, I firmly believe and always have that going through works more than one time, rereading a novel, re-listening to a symphony, rewatching a movie, seeing a play for a third time, there is always something new to discover. In 90% of cases, yes, some art isn't really meant to be engaged with that way, that's fine, but re-listening to a symphony, rereading a book, you can always discover something new. New flowers bloom with each interpretation, because you are always bringing a new form of yourself to that. And that's part of what made Beethoven such a spectacular composer. I don't mean to stay on composers, but it's easy to say, because you can listen to a symphony more than once in a day, several times over a week, and you can learn something new every time. It's a little harder with video games, because even a short game like this is still 13 to 16 hours. You can't. It's really, really hard to go through that in 1 week. Really tough to go through that multiple times in a month. So video games are at a bit of a disadvantage there, but going through these games more than once always, in my experience, opens up new avenues of discovery. That's why for this show, I really, really try to do my best to play the game and also go back and rewatch the story beats, cutscenes, skip through like walking, exploring, random battles if applicable. But I really think there's value in that. And for that reason, I really want to get this tightrope walk straight. That balancing act is really difficult. But thank you for indulging me on this tangent, by the way.
Yeah, for sure. And 1000xRESIST is one of those games that like you could have an in-depth conversation about this game with 20 different people, and you'll probably end up with 20 different conversations and takeaways from it. Because there's so many themes, there's so many real world parallels, like different people latch on to different things, and that's the big takeaway they have from this game. And so like this conversation here is different from my podcast about it, because we all are looking at this game through different lenses, and the depth of this game supports, you know, that level of discussion repeated over and over, for sure.
So chapter 5, I can't remember. Sorry if I'm repeating myself here. Chapter 5 ends with Watcher seemingly talking to herself, a copy of herself. And at one point, the name Watcher and the other Watcher's name tag of question marks switches. This is the first clue that something is going on here, but this will become clear later. So let's jump back to this in time.
Yeah.
This opens up Act 2 of the game. We are now in what appears to be a new town. The first time I saw this, I was like, "Oh, this is Sunset Visitors Kamurocho." That's it just immediately reminded me of Kamurocho. We're in a new town. We're in a new shell. This shell has black and white clothing and has black hair. These are called miscellaneous. They haven't earned or picked a shade or a name. So already, if we were exploring in the previous society, this is a new society, by the way. We learned that in like 2 seconds. If we were exploring in the previous society, we know that there was a healer sister that was picking and assigning functions. And of course, nobody used names. Immediately, this is upset here. So this is a fresh start, right? This is society anew. We're told to go help Bartender. That's the second little flag that should be raised. Oh, Bartender's here. Interesting. We're going around town gathering ingredients for her. This just serves as a way for you to explore a little bit, even though you're not really here all of that long. But markedly, what this also shows is that this town, this underground town, we learn this is below the orchard, is sort of run by a police state of Red Sisters. What's interesting here is the Red Sisters, who they function as police. They are police. They have guns. very threatening, very hardline. They use voice disguisers, and well, everybody's a clone, I guess, so I don't can't really tell faces apart, I guess. But they all have the same hairstyle. They use voice disguisers, and it's setting up this idea that those in power should have anonymity, which does not work. One, because that anonymity is, I can't say that word. Anonymity is one-sided. They can see everybody else. And two, that only serves to bolster this power that will inevitably get misused and mistreated. This is a total police state.
Yeah, I will admit that while Rick slipped in there that they make it obvious this is a new area pretty quickly, which they do, but what was not obvious very immediately was what's happening. I was completely befuddled by this in a way that, like, I was fascinated. I was put off for like half a second because, like, wait, where am I? What is this now? But then when you're running around getting the ingredients for bartender, I went, oh, this is a different place. How long is this at? Wait, how much time has passed? Because, like, we do in this chapter see nowhere, and we see these red police officers essentially who look very much like Youngest. And so, like, I was just you're trying to soak in a ton of information at once, and some of it seeps through and some of it falls to the side. And I kind of love this overflow feeling, because just at the moment that you think you know, like, oh, I know where this is going. We just got to the immediate res part, so I know where this is headed. They go, no, you don't. Here, you're in a new place as a new person, figure it out. And they do reveal it pretty quickly, like, kind of at least what this area is. But then you're still trying to piece together, wait, well, who really am I? Who are these other people? And I just kind of like that scattershot. I think it makes for a very fascinating way to jump into a scene, especially basically halfway through the game.
Yeah, they give you some, like, things to help you connect. Like, the colors are important. The fact that the soldiers are red, and you already know a red character. You know what they're about. That was Principal from the earlier part. And the fact that, like Rick said, bartender's there, so there's a connection, and it seems to be the same bartender if you remember anything about her. And then also, this is the first place where people have names, though. So
yeah.
Like, you meet your miscellaneous character's friend. I think her name is Chris. And you have a conversation on a rooftop. You talk about what's going on. You get the sense that, like, even before stuff goes down that Rick's probably going to bring up here in a bit, Miscellaneous doesn't like the Red Sisters. Like, people are fed up with them. They feel, kept down here.
It's a class stratification struggle system.
Yeah, and then you learn about, like, the literal stratification system, about how sisters can go up. Like, the sisters are guarding this elevator or this stairs that go up to the orchard. Eventually, like, you see that staircase really early on as you're walking around, and the soldiers there give you a hard time. So it's a brand new setting. Like, it just as you had started to feel like you felt comfortable with the orchard and what's going on with that society, it's all gone. We're starting over down here. But they do give you enough to, like, help you feel a little bit grounded in where you are and who some of these people are, I think.
You mentioned Chris. Two quick things with that. One, Chris and your Miscellaneous clearly have a history. They reference this a lot, that your relationship is very tense, and they imply that your inactions, your actions, something that you did or didn't do resulted in the death of someone. It's implied. Nothing about this is ever elaborated on. I think this might be sequel bait. Ooh, like, that was my first thought. I was like, oh, I think they're planting the seeds for a sequel here. Maybe. I don't know.
I'll take it if so.
Astute, and I mean really astute viewers, I didn't catch this my first time around, will see the name Chris and the other Miscellaneous you meet named Melody, and immediately go back to the end of chapter 5 when Watcher is talking to her clone. The very last thing you get to do is you have a choice between 3 names: Bartender, Chris, and Melody. And if you piece that together, you might be able to make a pretty educated guess as to what that was or who that was in that scene. I didn't, my first time through.
Me either.
No, not at all. Yeah.
But this society, while you're helping bartender, some of the sisters from before are still here. The quote-unquote before times are kind of taboo. All of the sisters are, I should say the sisters proper, our sisters, are not looked on kindly. Watcher's labeled as a traitor. BBF is known as like a drunk murderer. Healer got incinerated for malpractice. The only two that remain are Knower, who is now known as the High Minister, and Principal, who is just like a god amongst all, the ruler supreme.
Yeah.
So this is set up. The Reds are harassing the Miscellaneous. It's a class struggle. They're kind of positioned as being the de facto rulers of this place. And unfortunately, the predictable happens. Bartender, who continually doesn't show hostility towards the Reds, but is very clearly still clinging to the old ways in the past. Bartender is cornered at night by a group of them and ultimately gets murdered. This is painted by the Reds and the official government as a suicide, despite a red shotgun being used and her being shot in the back. If you bring this up to people, they sort of challenge you and they're like, do you have something that you want to bring to the provisional government? And, you know, they're basically saying that their version of the truth is the truth. Prove us wrong using our facts. And this is our sort of radicalizing moment, right? We happen upon the scene because we can't sleep. Perhaps even we are connected to the past's unconsciousness. There's a big theme of eternal recurrence and collective unconsciousness later on. So perhaps this is that. But we happen across the scene. We see what happens, and they paint trauma here and PTSD, shell shock, fantastically. As you're walking away from the scene, you learn what happens. Knower is there and says, "Yeah, this was a suicide. Do you have anything to say?" "I didn't think so." And as you leave to talk with your other sisters and sort of start your what functionally is a terrorism group, the camera is hyper-focused, like pulled into your back. It is always following your eyesight, and everything around you is blurred.
Mm-hmm.
As you're walking, like sounds are kind of dimmed and muddied, and your objective keeps updating, like find Chris, can't be alone, no, not Chris, where's Melody, burn them all, kill them all, and it just keeps updating. And I thought that was just a fantastic way to represent this sort of traumatic shock that one might feel.
Yeah. There are only a few pieces of media that I really think have depicted a panic attack very well. And they're not always in the place you expect. In movies, it's the Puss in Boots: The Last Wish movie that just came out. Like, they depict Puss in Boots having a panic attack that you could feel. It was
like Shrek Puss in Boots?
Yeah. And it was masterful. If you've not seen the movie, it's a very good movie, but I highly recommend looking up that scene, because typically panic attacks are shown as like manic and kind of over the top, but this really depicted, and this scene here, the tunnel vision, the like kind of heart in your throat, the constant objective updating, like it made me anxious because I could just really feel it. I always think when, like, you can always tell when someone's writing in a panic attack to be a set piece versus someone who has panic attacks exploring that in media. And this is definitely one of those. I thought it was incredibly done as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would not have guessed Puss in Boots to make an appearance in this episode. So this is it. We're radicalized now. We talk with Chris. Chris is down to burn it all to the ground. We are going to find a sympathizer upstairs because we're invited there now. You know, one out, one in. Bartender is now dead. We are now the new de facto bartender. There's a commentary here on how you could kind of view this class system as dehumanizing. Perhaps another podcast could get into that in more depth. I think it would be interesting. There's also there's an anarchist lens you could view a lot of this through as well, which I think is very, very fascinating. Not the time or the place here. I don't have the know-how about that. But we're going up there now, and there's a sympathizer there. We're told to find her. And we also choose our name finally, and we choose Blue.
Interesting.
Like Watcher.
Yeah.
So upstairs we go. This is what I wrote in my notes here is, if God is now dead, we are seeing the more important and interesting follow-up question, where does one go from here? The society has progressed from one dominated and ruled by dogma to one dominated and ruled by government. I also think it's a little interesting to see another sub-theme for him here, the passage of information through time and how history is written.
Yeah.
You know, history traditionally is written through great powerful men, that narrative. See more in the Pentiment episode. Here, it's more so through who is in control of the government at any given time.
Yeah.
Which is maybe for our day and age a little more apropos.
Yeah, like both of those systems, the before and after, are both means of controlling the population. So the religious society centered around the All-Mother, that is a way to keep everybody in line and a way to get everybody to act the way you want them to act, so that one day they might, go to the other side. And and they don't know exactly what that means. They know what they think it means, but they all want to, or most of them want to go on with that. But like you said, now that's over. The religion is dead. So where are we going now? We're going to a different form of control, and we have this harsh authoritarian government going on here. And the color choice for the ruling class in here, not a coincidence. If you look into the backstory of Hong Kong and their history and things like that. So it's interesting that when you bring up the question, God is dead, what happens now? Authoritarian government immediately slides in to fill the vacuum.
Yeah. The idea of treating one human essentially as God, which we've alluded to already. And I think it's just kind of crazy obvious how it mirrors, medieval society, king appointed by God. Everyone observes that God. God is dead. Now we have essentially a political force to swoop in and take over. Even using still the religious monikers like High Minister and stuff, I think it's just really interesting how it's shaped. And I think the way the rest of this chapter plays out, I don't think anything surprised me at face value, but how it shakes out, how things happen, what's said, that surprised me. And I think that's really interesting. And that all comes down to the writing and voice acting, especially in this scene in particular, because we're going to get to a moment in this chapter where I just thought the voice acting was brilliant because of how it was set up. And we've alluded to this a bit throughout the part one about these voices all feel grounded, not necessarily good or bad, but grounded in a reality. And I think this chapter is a really incredible opportunity of how they show that off too.
Please highlight that if my summation kind of moves past it.
It's just interesting to me also with, we moved from a literal god of Iris to, if you think about real world analogs where like one person basically has the power of a god, like in North Korea or something like that. And that's the type of society we've moved into here, where you don't have an actual all-powerful god, but you have a person who might as well be a god at this point.
We've traded a theological god for an authoritarian god.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Both authoritarian in their own ways, at least the way that it's told to the sisters in Act 1 here.
Yeah, 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other, which
6
is
to
better
1.
here. Yeah. Oh, jeez.
You threw that alley-oop, Rick. Don't get mad at me for dunking it.
So we get to explore this society a little bit more. We learn a little bit how things are. A lot of the sisters are dissatisfied at how things have carried on after Watcher's murder of Iris, but there are plenty who still want to just keep things going. Zhao type clones are now very, very prominent. They live on the other side and come in from time to time, essentially just to serve the Iris types. That becomes a little more important later. We're not really sure what the deal with that is just yet. But while we're up here, we're going to find sympathizers. 3 Zhao type sympathizers and 3 sister sympathizers. And the end goal here is to detonate a bomb. Like, we're just not playing around. We went from zero to bomb.
Yeah.
During this celebratory play of remembrance that's put on every year. I think I might have miswritten this. Is this the anniversary of the death, or is this their birthday and they're just honoring her memory with that depiction? It's one of the two.
Yeah, I can't remember. Interesting note though here, for this and when they were doing the birthday party in the earlier chapter, one thing I picked up on is they have the same fruitcake for every single celebration of the Allmother here, and it just shows like the tradition, I guess, but the tradition is based on such limited knowledge here in this society where they're like, we need a cake. This is the only kind of cake that exists. Every time we'll have this cake.
It also shows the devs' pragmatism for using assets, reusing assets.
For sure.
To
We're
make
not
things
making
easier for
multiple cake
themselves.
models. Use the same one. But also, this is the cake
Yeah,
that
why not?
Iris had in, I think it's chapter 2, when you're in her apartment, when it's her birthday.
Mm-hmm.
That's the cake that her parents got for her then. So so this is the third time it comes up, and when it was like, oh, it's another party, they're gonna have that fucking cake, aren't they? And sure enough, there it was.
There's another recurring image that I might bring up towards the end that I don't know that I have a read on it. I'd be curious if one of you do, because I'm a little at a loss for it, but it keeps coming up. It's got to mean something.
Also,
or maybe they just threw that in for blowhards like me to just throw us off the trail.
Hey, I know that. Yeah. Is this the chapter where they explain why the Jow types are subservient? Because I thought that was super interesting. Like, I think it's during this part when they're first introduced, you get to talk to some of them.
I didn't write it down. Would you mind expounding on that?
So the Jow types found Zhao's diary.
Yes,
And
they
they read the
right.
diary and they were like, oh, well, our ancestor Zhao, she revered Iris. So therefore we should revere the Iris types. We are here to follow what they say. Like, these are our gods, basically. And I thought that was super interesting. Another level in this stratification of society here.
This has so much in common with Pentiment. It was such a happy accident I put these two together in the same month, because what are we doing here? How we are reinterpreting history, and when does that paint chip away and the Pentimento shine through of the past, and how does it do so? It's the same thing, man.
Yeah. I mean, this is pretty fragile, and it's gonna, as soon as it falls, the Jows will start to have their own ideas. But for now, this is what we have.
Yeah.
So we find our sympathizers, and it's almost time to blow up everything.
Yeah.
The play gets put on. This retells the events the night that Watcher confronted Iris. The actors are purposefully not very good, and it's very funny.
Mm-hmm.
Let no sister be hurt under my reign. Thou occupants, I shall smite. Together, us sisters are a frightful sight.
Mother, you must be so tired. Please, you have done enough, so retire.
Sister, I live to serve you. These labors of love, they know no curfew.
Principal plays herself, notably, and the ending is altered. When Iris is dying, she's dying in Principal's arms, and she tells her to carry on, never go outside, carry on and take the reins for me and be the leader and keep everybody inside, basically entrusting everything to Principal. And at the very end, Principal just goes off script to this poor actor and says, "Call me youngest." And she's like, "We didn't rehearse this." And she's like, you have the god of the state. You are in their arms. You are in a very submissive position. And they're like, "Call me youngest. Fucking do it now." And so she does. And you have the opportunity to end this scene whenever you want. You could do it immediately. You can keep going. But it's just Principal essentially forcing a situation to help quell her grief over what she has done in the past, because she never got that closure. And this is as close as she's going to get. Matt, I almost said you're fingering this guy. You're raising your hand. with your finger.
Leave your
cut
dirty
that.
talk
Should I
about
cut
the
that?
sky out of this. Look, you wanted me to point out that the comment I made before about the writing, this is it.
Yes.
This,
Yeah.
and it's not just this. Like, this alone is a good scene, but the way it's voice acted, the uncomfortability is top notch. Like, it is very, like, the bafflement of the actor who's like what? Like, it just, like, I leaned in, and I'm playing this on my Steam Deck, which you can't really lean into, but I did. Like, this scene brings you in. Oh, and like, when they show it, it's pretty much black backdrop, zoomed in on them. It's just such an intimate and horrifying moment at the same time. And that is 100% due to the writing and the voice acting here. And it's why I will fight to the death anybody who says the voice acting is bad here, because you can say that it feels grounded, maybe even a little less polished, but it is not bad. It is purposeful, and this is the proof of it.
Yeah, this scene here with Principal forcing the actor to go off script like this is one of those times that made me go, holy shit, look at what this game is doing here. Look at what this story's doing. Because Principal is the dictator in this fucking place, and the Principal has all this power now. And we had never gotten any sense that even in the scene where Principal goes in at the end of chapter 5, I think, and like kind of, Iris says her last words to Principal there, we never got the sense that Principal was like really still torn up about what happened with the youngest that we talked about last episode. But this moment where she leans in, she says, call me youngest. And then she keeps going on. She says more stuff. She says, like, say you forgive me, and goes through all of these things. And it's just like, wow, she is not over this. Like, and like you said, Rick, she'll never get that chance to really confront Iris with this the way that she maybe would like to. This is the best chance, even though this is just some poor actor who is being put on a really tight spot here. But taking the chance to just like release all of this. And I had been wondering, like, okay, Principal's the youngest, but how does Principal feel about the past? That was so long ago, but it's still so close to the surface up here.
Yeah. That they say grief is like a ball within a box, within a square boundary, and it gets smaller over time, but it still bounces against the sides and reverberates that pain all over again. And if we're not careful, that grief can unintentionally harm others, as it's doing here, even if it's just, maybe harm is a strong word, make someone exceedingly uncomfortable. You could cut the tension with a fruitcake knife. It's that potential is always there.
Yeah.
Amazing scene.
I think also this, so we hinted at this is the moment where the bomb's going to go off, and it cuts to Blue to press the trigger, and you have the power to press the trigger. But there is almost no set moment. Like, eventually it ends and you are just left to press the button, but it goes on for a bit. And like, I know many people who press it right away, press it after one line, press it after several lines. And like, it's funny, in a game that likes to mirror choice, but there really isn't choice. You often get options, but they're options that don't mean anything. They are like the 3 names we discussed. They are just to elaborate on the story. It's an excuse to provide more background. This also isn't really a choice because you're not missing that much here, but it's still fascinating that they let you choose when to press the button and kind of instill the fear that maybe if you don't do it, you'll fail somehow, even though you can't. And I love that.
Notably, the game forces you to press it before the actor can tell youngest that she's forgiven. I think that's a really, really good thing to point out. So the bomb goes off. It cuts to black, and when you wake up, it is chaos. You didn't die. The Jow that you were standing with is dead. Many, many others are dead. There's blood, fire everywhere. Secretary comes in at this point, Watcher Secretary, voice pitched down, indicating that time has passed. This is what I alluded to in the first episode. This voice acting decision, I was baffled a little bit when this happened. I was like, why did they do that? You're raising your, do you know why they did that?
Just a theory, but the voice actor for Secretary was an actual like preteen. So it's possible that if lines were recorded in chronological order, their voice may have
Think they
changed
went through
over the
puberty.
course of years.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I hope that's the case. That's great.
Yeah, I actually just saw that recently. The devs posted here's our voice actors picture. Look how big Secretary's voice actor's gotten. And I was like, oh, okay. And they showed a picture of them like when production began. And they were a kid and now they're, a young adult. So it was interesting to see. Kind of like Walt in Lost, if anyone watched that show. Why did Walt go away? Because he can't be the little kid character anymore. He's too big.
I think this is the third time you've been on the show, and I've had to say I've never seen Lost.
Well, one of these days you'll be like, Dave, I know exactly what you're talking about, man. Guess what? I watched Lost.
Yeah.
One of these days. Everybody tells me the ending is so bad. I've just been putting it off.
It's like Mass Effect 3. It's the journey. It's not the ending.
Sure, I'll give you that.
So Secretary says questions later, run now. And as we're running through this is juxtaposed with scenes from the Hong Kong protest in the style of the game's engine, of course.
Yeah.
That's important to point out because there is real life footage later, which is such a good artistic choice. But I put in the notes that I'm not going to speak too much to this Hong Kong illusion simply because I don't know that it's my place to, and there are probably other creators who could do so better. I just don't want to draw any kind of conclusions and analyzations on this whenever I don't have the ammo I don't have the bows and the arrows in the quiver. I had to settle on some kind of analogy there. So I don't want to minimize it, but I also don't want to misinterpret this entirely, especially because the devs are from there or have lineage there.
Right. I think that you can obviously draw parallels between two very tense situations here. And I think there is a collective memory angle to why it comes up on the screen here that we will explore later on. But I think this is one of those things where the second time you play the game, or the very least, the second time you run through the story, you'll start to realize this came up later, but it was here before and I just didn't know what I was seeing. I think this is one of those.
Yeah. And it's done so brilliantly. Again, this is the graphics continue to impress because seamlessly shifting between scenes as you approach some of the red cops, Gestapo, whatever you want to call them, it'll just fade in and out to the SWAT teams of the Hong Kong riots and other folks, and it's just it doesn't load, it doesn't warble, it just jumps, but they match 1-to-1 as you're moving through the space. This is also in first person if I remember, and it's as frantic as that tunnel vision we had earlier with Blue, and I love how they're using perspective here to really impress the urgency and the panic and the disorientation.
Yeah, it's where that film background might help out.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. I know we aren't able to hang out on every scene, but the cinematography across this entire game is top notch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think we said that in the last episode, but it bears repeating.
Yeah.
So Secretary takes you down to the train. You're being pursued. At one point, a red guard gets shot right in the dome, and it turns out it's BBF. She's not a wandering drunk after all. She's here. And she points her gun at you, and she says, get on the train, the boss wants to speak to you. And the boss is Fixer, and Fixer's only words to you are,
who the fuck are you? And what are you doing blowing shit up?
Paraphrasing. Well, not really. I think she says, who the fuck are you, and why are you blowing things up?
Yeah.
And here's something weird. We're positioned to begin hallucinating here. We see a bunch of secretaries, and Secretary will say, you've been in this communion too long, I'm resetting it. This will hurt. And then it just cuts to black. So this is another sort of rug pulled out from under us that now we're wondering, and we don't get any immediate payoff to this because we're put into a different scenario, but we're thinking, wait, another communion?
Yeah.
When did this start?
Yeah.
I didn't get the context and like put these pieces together until I literally restarted the game and played the first 2 chapters again. And then I was like, oh.
Yeah. The idea that this could all have been a communion, like it was a dream the whole time, although I feel like that in movies often is cheaply done, this was masterfully executed. I think realizing that it was technically a dream the whole time is really fascinating because it just throws so much of the chaos into perspective in the fact that a lot of these things have been chaotic. Like it not making sense makes more sense, which is weird to say out loud.
Yeah, what was that one TV show that famously ended like that, where it was all a dream and it spawned this whole extended universe?
St. Elmo's Fire, I believe, is the show.
Is that the show?
I believe St. Elmo's Fire, yeah.
That wasn't the ending of The Sopranos that everyone was mad about?
Oh! No. Or the ending of Lost, or the ending of whatever else. But yeah, I really didn't get it here quite yet. It's not until I got through the whole thing and like they kind of blanketly tell you, like in this chapter or the next, it's like, oh shit. What? And I love moments like that.
This takes us to chapter 7. I'm going to summarize some of what happens here. Watcher is chained up. This is from Watcher's POV directly after stabbing Iris. Intermittently, Knower will come in, gives us a sort of overview of what's going on. She's not unsympathetic towards Watcher at all, but at the same time, she recognizes, hey, you killed Mom. That's not going to go away. As time goes on, she comes back, and each time she will be more ingrained within the power system outside, eventually becoming the High Minister, as we said. And at one point, she offers you an out. She says, if you make a public statement saying that you acted on your own accord, that this was all your idea, and that it wasn't principle altering the communion as you're insisting it is, we can forget about this. So you say no. Principle did alter the communion. That's what you're saying. But eventually, you give in and you make a statement, but you go off script. You tell your side of the story. And of course, Knower is playing psychological warfare this whole time. She saw this coming, so she said, that was a decoy. Of course it was. And because of this, cuts out your eyes. Literally stealing the essence of who you are. You are Watcher. You are a Watcher that can't watch. Now you have your identity taken away, as many political prisoners do in some of these more violent regimes that this game is referencing. Really crazy. Yeah.
That was brutal. Like, I mean, eye stuff in any game is brutal, but like this was a pretty brutal scene. It doesn't like, if I'm remembering right, it doesn't just like cut to black and someone screams. Like there's a little bit more to this eye cutting out scene, and it's rough.
I think, and it's before this, it's in the last chapter where we see supposedly the Watcher that killed Iris on display.
Yeah.
Technically stuffed, practically like a taxidermy for everyone to see. And so at this point now in chapter 7, with no confirmation of anything, you're going, okay, is this before that happened? Like, where is this, right? And it's not until after this we find out, well, we'll get to it, but like, it's just the timeline's still a little wonky here. But yeah, I think something important about the violence in this game, and I appreciate when games do this with violence, especially since video games tend to overlook violence or like smooth it out, make it palatable, is that it is not. Every violent moment in this game is not palatable and is brutal, and the eye cutting out scene, like it's not hard to make me squirm, but the squelching in this particular was like, I was like, oh no, this is yuck. Oh, this is bad. And then your vision, because it doesn't end there, then your vision for the rest of this chapter is like coned and very small, and you can't really see, and like you can kind of just hear and like only see when something's right next to you, which I don't know if is actually true or if we're just given that as the player because this is all in first person. But like it just, now you're basically in darkness while still more stuff is happening,
and we're left wondering when Watcher will die, because that display that you had mentioned of Watcher being stuffed and set up as an example, she has a bandage across her eyes indicating that they've been gouged out. There's blood and everything. So as far as we know, that's still yet to come.
Yeah.
We do get to see, after our eyes are cut out, this could be tapping into this whole collective memory that we've been referencing. we get to see the first communion with Iris and the original sisters. This is shot using real imagery, like a real camcorder, highways, driving on the highways, imagery from, well, I suppose in-game it would be Hong Kong. I don't know if it's actually Hong Kong or if it's just Canada where they're based. But it's real footage, shot entirely in reverse, which is a nice little effect to keep things sort of in that reverie-esque state that we're kind of in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this may or may not be revealed here. I apologize if it's not, but if it isn't, it's revealed very shortly after. But there is a big reveal here that is everything up until this point has been a communion. Yeah. Everything that we have played up until now. The longest communion that Watcher has ever taken part in, and it has been with Blue. When it's revealed to us, we don't know why, but that's the case. She needed to let us see everything. Oh, I do remember this is here. She needed to let us see everything, and now we're going to see the final moments that Principal wanted nobody to see. So for whatever reason, Principal had repressed these. Next, something, I mean, this is another left turn. BBF and Fixer, accompanied by Knower, come in here. They take out the guard that's been watching Watcher. Knower was in on this the whole time, even up to cutting your eyes out, which incenses Fixer beyond belief. You know, Knower's position is that if she didn't take action, the ruse would have been up. It would have been seen by Principal. Mm-hmm. Fixer's position is you didn't have to cut her eyes out.
The days get shorter, don't they? She's blind.
You really took your time.
You said she would be safe.
She's breathing, isn't she?
That is not what I meant.
No thanks? No acknowledgement? You're the one who's obsessed with this whole bloodless encounter. Taking your sweet time, everything in its right place. Don't you understand by now? Someone will always get hurt. That is the reality. You're lucky she still remembers who she is.
Let's go, BB. Knower. Things are in motion, okay? We'll be in touch.
And this is what I alluded to earlier, Matt, whenever I had mentioned off of one of your points that this game, intentionally or not, puts this subtle nod towards this idea of not being all the way to one side or the other, is that Knower has a lot of good points throughout the rest of this game. Like, had Knower not acted her role to the best of her abilities, they probably would have been found out. And they eventually do get found out, even though Knower thinks that everything she's doing is, you know, bulletproof. One of the guards eventually says, actually, something's up here. So that eventually happens. That probably would have happened sooner had Knower not fulfilled the role of High Minister. Again, I don't know that that's intentional because it does exist in a friction with some of the later themes, but maybe. Who knows? Not everything has to slot in one-to-one in a work. Things can exist as an idea, and that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think also this plays at like undercover or belief and self-assurance, and this idea that like if you have a plan, you have to do whatever it takes to stick to that plan, even if whatever it takes is outside what you want. And is that right? Right? Like, this game isn't interested in whether you think Knower did the right thing or not. What it is interested in is that it's telling you that Knower knows they did the right thing, even if it's a thing they didn't want to do. It doesn't matter if it was or wasn't morally correct. It's that Knower decided it was, that Knower had to do that or they would be found out. And I think that's really interesting here. It's like a lot of the sisters have acted with this kind of conviction, Fixer as well. And I think we're seeing the strong will of all of these characters come to fruition and kind of an apex here. And we'll hear more from Healer soon and as well. And I think we're really getting the full picture of who these sisters are and what they'll do for what they need to succeed.
Yeah, and there's a common thread between this and what Fixer did early in the game and then setting off the bomb at the play a little bit earlier, which is that these are all revolutionary acts in a way. And there's a parallel to real world revolutionary acts, which is that peaceful revolutionary acts don't really work. In order to get results, like Noah says in this scene, someone has to get hurt. That's the reality. And it's not saying that like peaceful protest is not effective, but like they are going for radical change in a short period of time here with a bomb and with, breaking out the political prisoner in here. They need drastic measures to accomplish these things. And that's kind of a through line between all the big things that people do here with those three plot points, I guess, that I mentioned there. That's the through line here. They choose the quick and, arguably more effective method.
Yeah, someone will always get hurt. That's a line that's said a couple of times throughout here. That didactic little saying, I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. I think at one point that is clear. Perhaps Blue was even thinking that when she set off the bomb, but that doesn't excuse a lack of planning. I think that's where I ended up sitting on it eventually. With some planning, there are so many sisters that didn't have to die with that bomb. I'm not sure. That's a really tough gray area that gets into political philosophy a lot.
Sure.
That I'm not very
not saying that
in.
Like the innocent bystanders at the play needed to die in order for this to work, but the idea that's on display here is that when you have characters at such a high level of power that like a peaceful, a sit-in or something like that is not going to really do anything to affect them. And the sisters did have a plan. Like Blue just came and fucked it all up. So they probably were working on something a little bit less radical than what actually happened here.
That's true. That's revealed in the next scene after they all take Watcher out from that scene. Well, they leave Noah behind. Noah says, come on, you got to make this look realistic. So they just fucking knock her out. And we're all going to reconvene on the train that Blue got taken to with Secretary. Watcher is there too. She's basically comatose. This is the first time Blue gets to meet everybody face to face, and nobody is happy with her. Like you said, they had a plan in motion for years. They were working with the ministers to overthrow Principal. They weren't expecting someone with a fucking bomb to come in. I suppose it's prudent to mention here as well. Watcher and Fixer are not on good terms at the moment. Fixer offered her eyes to Watcher. Watcher refused. This just kind of escalated into needless fighting, and now they're just not speaking to each other.
There's that old wound between the two of them that's not healed from the original betrayal. Yeah,
it seems like they are still in conflict in that way. And I think what's really interesting here is you get the really full picture of like how much Watcher has been putting herself under duress to do these communions, to make sure that this information is seen, like anything else. And it's made clear in this chapter too that Watcher will continue to do what we were talking before about doing what you need to, whether it's morally right or wrong. Watcher also this whole time has been doing whatever it takes to continue to further what they want, even at the risk of her own health, which is deteriorating.
And it's deteriorating fast. Those communions take a toll on the body. And not to mention, she was bleeding out for who knows how long. But at one point here, as you're on the train, she becomes lucid and specifically asks for Blue. Fixer is refusing to see her. BB begs you not to tell her that she's dying. Healer says, do not commune with her. She will die if that happens. So when you approach her, before you could get more than like 5 words in, Watcher immediately starts a communion. There's just nothing you could do to stop it. interesting here is in the communion, she's constantly running from you. It's almost like she senses her mortality is here, and she needs to be in motion to escape it, right? It's like when you know something is wrong in your life and you just need to keep busy, because the busier you are, the more you can put it at bay. Even if it's something like, my stomach really hurts, I should probably go to the doctor, so maybe if I just keep fidgeting here and writing stuff down and scrolling, I could just ignore it just a little while longer.
Yeah.
Except here it's with mortality. Maybe that wasn't the best analogy, sorry. Watcher chose blue specifically for these communions because she was unaffiliated. She was a nobody. She was bound by neither faction nor judgment. And at this point, Blue is just despairing that everything is too far gone. They're at each other's throats. There's too much infighting. So Watcher sort of explains some background to you. The occupants communicate through metaphor and memory recall. It's what we've seen. Their memories are perfect, but human memory, that's pitiful. The secretary devices, they were a gift to Iris, who is now immortal in body, but fallible in memory. So those gifts were to aid her, to help bring her to the status of an occupant memory-wise. They also allow for memory dives to occur. That's how we can commune. It's just another way of communicating, as far as they're concerned. In return for this gift and Iris's obedience to them, Iris could command an occupant. That's how she wiped out all of the 50 at one point. I wish they would all fucking drop dead. That's how it happened. She commanded the occupant to do so. But when all three that are gifted are present, Secretary helps Watcher explain, a mass communion can take place with all sisters on all sides. Everybody will be present. And Watcher wants to use this option to present the truth to everybody, the full truth, the truth of Principal, of Iris's parents and grandparents, all of the shades of gray, so everybody can decide for themselves. No more secrets.
Yeah, it's that idea that there's been so much selective information given to people in this game that they're banking on putting everybody on the same playing field as far as knowing the facts. Everyone's going to make the fairly obvious choice of how to move forward with that knowledge. But they just haven't had the chance here because they've been under two fairly oppressive ways of life. Like with the religion, with the Allmother, they were being fed a fabricated story about how they need to live their lives and what's out there waiting for them. And now under Principal's new society, I'm sure there's information control happening there too. I mean, the play, right? The play that the Principal interferes with, the end of that play is not how it happened. That's something that's made up for the play because that's the history that Principal wants to teach the people. So giving the people the real story is going to align them in the direction that, these sisters are hoping will help, turn over society again, this time for the better. Right. We strip away all of the paint that's been painted over history until the original painting remains for all to see. Mm-hmm. Something that we didn't mention here is Healer at one point says that Watcher is addicted to being in communions and living in the past. Secretary will reveal that to us here, that this is the 837th time Watcher has done this exact communion, which is just a clear cautionary tale to the theme of what it means to interpret the past. And in a way, Watcher is no different from the occupants, just living in it perpetually and not being able to move forward. But we learn that after we try to confront Iris about her dying. We do tell her. She said, "You're dying." She won't believe this. Nowhere has got her all kinds of paranoid. But when we ask her to remember, her memories are just fragmented. She's done so much shifting that to bring back the Slaughterhouse 5 reference, she's like Billy Pilgrim. She's unstuck in time. Nothing is linear anymore. And this communion ends with Watcher lamenting her decisions before bringing us to Iris's room.
Sometimes your backpack isn't big enough.
That's how it goes.
Isn't it strange? I've never actually been here before, but everything in my body tells me it's home. Thank you, Blue. I'm ready to see my sisters now. I can't wait to see you. Secretary? Yes, Watcher. Lights out.
This to me is the past, the ancestors, who we were, what we've done, the beliefs of old religion, finally reconciling with the new, the contemporary, the beliefs of the now, and living out the consequences. It is a form of unity and a declaration of acceptance. And all we can do at this point is just push forward. It's a really beautiful scene. It might be one of my favorites in the game. This is also, I don't mean to jump away from that thematic nugget too soon, but the whale as an image comes back here and speaks for the first time. This whale is in so many scenes, and I just don't know what it's supposed to mean. This is what I meant earlier. I'm not sure. This might be something super obvious and I'm just missing it, but I kind of don't understand why it's there or why it's speaking now.
I think I probably just chalked it up to dreamy, whamey, presentation here that we have I forget what the whale says. So yeah, it's hard to draw meaning from its presence.
I think the whale puts forth that didactic nugget that comes back at the end that not everything can fit in the backpack.
I mean, I think that based on the earlier communions of Iris's life and like when she was going to leave with the 50 and she's packing and all of that and can't fit everything, I think it's this idea that he is the vocal representation of the past life and how you can't take it all with you. When we move forward, we leave things behind. I don't think it's meant
That's
to be.
a good point.
Like, I don't think it's meant to be a big picture thing. I think it's just mostly vocalizing this feeling that you can't take everything with you. And the fact that Watchers communed all these times, hoping for something, we don't even completely know what at this point, maybe to educate those, to radicalize, to change, to help, all of these things she's feeling, she can't do it all. She clearly can't. She's about to die. And this is kind of the culmination of that, of accepting whether she wants to or not. This is the end and she can't take everything with her.
Both of these, that notion there of, you can't take everything with you, but also the acknowledgement and acceptance of things in the past and then how you move forward from that. Both of those factor into the ending of the game and the way that progresses. So this is, continuing, maybe setting up one part of that, but continuing to feed the idea that you need to accept the past and that you need to live with the things that happened in the past rather than, living in ignorance of it or something like that.
Yeah, I really want to get to the end because, again, I love this game, but I think the ending is weaker than the rest. It's the Final Fantasy IX dilemma, where everything setting it up was so good that the ending just has so much to live up to, and how can it in some ways? Another game that I love, I don't think Sunset Visitor will ever listen to this, so I don't know why I'm going to such great lengths to assure the listeners I love this game. I do, but it is what it is. Yeah, Matt, I think you're right. I don't think it needs to be overthought, of which I am prone to doing. It's probably that exact reference. You mentioned, Matt, that Watcher dies. She does. After the communion ends, thankfully after she gets closure, she gets resonance, as it were. She is able to die in peace. The train is cooked. The train has broken down. That's something that we didn't mention. It broke down before the communion started. Fixer can't fix it. It needs to be abandoned. Fixer makes the decision to incinerate the train and burn Iris along with it. And that puts us into Chapter 9. We're on the final 2 chapters of the game, the last hurrah.
Just one quick note about Watcher dying and Fixer's decision at the end here. Fixer has the opportunity to go say goodbye to Watcher as she's dying, and Fixer says no. She refuses to go back because, well, probably a combination of things, but to me, that was another way to show you that Watcher deeply hurt Fixer with the decision that she made, and Fixer never forgave her for it, which feels like a very real human observation here, that not everybody gets forgiveness despite history or attempts to make up or even working together toward a common goal like they're doing here. Fixer never forgives her. Now, you might say also she doesn't want to go back and say goodbye because it's too raw and she doesn't want to face that. That could be another read to it too. But I took it as a very clear, like, no, fuck her. We're burning it.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that, and I did not explain it during the interrogation scenes with Watcher and Knower. What happened in the original communion where Fixer came in and said, hey, Allmother is talking to occupants, we need to burn this down. That wasn't Fixer.
Yeah.
That was Principal disguised as Fixer.
Right.
And when Fixer, the real Fixer, learned of what Watcher did, that was it. To her, she said, okay, you put this religion over what we had. That's it. You know, I'm done. You've made your choice.
And she
You've
never
drawn your line in
forgave
the
her.
sand. Yeah, and that's understandable. It's tragic that it had to end this way, but that's, like you said, I mean, that happens. That's real. Chapter 9 begins. This is where you find... Well, this isn't really a spoiler. This is where you find this... It looks like a space station, but it's actually the underground mobile bunker of the Pacific 50. We're about to learn what their whole deal is. This is actually a part... Like this and the orchard. This is all part of the same underground mechanism. That's not immediately clear here, but I'm just going to say it because it's easier. Just think of it as like two sectors of like the Death Star or something. Not the Death Star, the Millennium Falcon is what I was picturing in my head. We're the good guys. We're not the bad guys.
Yeah.
Or are we?
Are we the baddies?
Morality's not that black and white. There's only gray. There's no black and white. This bunker belonged to the Pacific 50. We are going to rendezvous with various groups here. Chris and the miscellaneous activists, the Jows. This and more people that will I listed out later. I don't want to stumble over that. We're all meeting up here. The tech is locked up via biometric data, so rather than try 50 pairs of eyes, we're going to go through a fake communion with Secretary to see what happened here. It's bleak. It mirrors the Society of the Sisters pretty heavily. Many try to make the best of their time here. Unrest runs rampant. The guards that are put in charge end up going wild with power, shooting down people. Iris is not well liked here at all. Eventually, Iris stabs somebody here. Suicides occur. Other stations, because there are more than just the 50, begin to, quote, self-drown. Others get hit with the occupant disease. It's madness. What's suggested here is that the occupants are drawn to large outbursts of negative memories. That's what draws them in. And this kind of saves our group, the Pacific 50, because they're hearing all of their colleagues dying, and their attention is so focused on like what's going to come next, what's going to come next. They don't have time to grieve, so the occupants leave them alone. They don't really come at them just yet, and that's something that I find really interesting. That's also, just jumping ahead a little bit, why they chose Iris, because she was so mean to everybody that she just drew them to her. Really fascinating take on a main character. I really like it.
Yeah, this I thought they said something to the effect of the occupants are drawn to strong formation of memories because that's why they're here basically. And you know, those negative emotions form strong memories, so maybe it's one and the same. But this part here where the people are dying in this Pacific 50 society down here, and there's a conversation between two of the leaders where, like, I think someone had gone on an expedition or something and they didn't come back and they're presumed dead. And they basically said, just don't tell the others. We can't tell them because they can't feel these emotions because that's going to bring them to us. And in that way, this is a really strong, like, horror scenario here where you cannot waver from like a stone-faced, emotionless state of mind. Otherwise, you'll die. And that was really crazy to me.
Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't help their mortality anyway. I think what's really interesting here is they use something here that we've seen in other parts of the game where you see people in stasis, but the dialogue is happening, and you see them as like these shades as you move through scenes, and then it'll reset. And like there's a really, as Rick said, like it goes to shit. Like things get bad and fast. And there's a scene I remember so vividly from this part of the game where someone is on a balcony while people are running to them yelling, "Don't do it." This person's clearly going to jump. And then the immediate next scene, a lot of these scenes have been time-lapse, like days. It's unclear. But here, back-to-back immediate scenes, you see the impact and the body is still there. And like, it's just horrific. And it continues to use violence to tell a story, but does not glorify it. In fact, it does the opposite, and it's just so powerful here. And that's not even the worst thing that happens. You alluded to them getting gunned down and loss of control, and it's just it's interesting to me that like when the sisters have a breakdown, it does turn violent also, but it didn't like this. I think this was a very good depiction of like humanity when it crumbles, which we've seen in many stories, and it's just a time lapse of it, and it hits this crescendo. All for us to just find the right pair of eyes, we had to experience all of this, which is not that different from the communion and the relived trauma and what relived trauma does to the psyche, both for these characters and then for the player as well.
This is about when the rest of the crew rolls in that we're going to rendezvous with. We've got the Devoted, which is this sort of new proto-religion, other Iris, a reincarnation they believe. They just want to return to the old ways and practice in peace. You've got the Resistance with Chris and her company, willing to do anything not to be oppressed and take Old Town, including potentially killing all of these sisters here. You've got the Neo-Provisional Government, Doreen, along with some Red sympathizers. They just want another chance to run a better government. Change shouldn't be rushed. We can learn from what we've done. And you've got the Jows, who, now knowing the full story between Iris and how horrible she was to Ancient Jow, as they call her, demand reparations. They want to rule the other side independent of the Irises and basically just want independence. It's positioning you to choose a new reality based on your political and democratic ideals. This is where I start to think the game is somewhat less effective than what has come before, particularly the way the ending is handled. I'm really not a big fan of it, but we can't really talk about it until we get there.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Fixer lays out the plan here. We're going to do a mass communion to show the truth to everybody, for everybody to interpret. To have that happen, we have to get Principal's 2 secretaries to join with ours. So we have to get those. Then we're going to fire up this ship that we've known as our world, back up and head to the surface, and we could just live our life anew. And each of the groups will join in with their ideals. Some are more willing, but that's the plan. The chapter sort of ends with a like mini in medias red moment of Blue, Fixer, and Healer blowing up the ceiling to the orchard and falling, and that it just cuts to black. Mm-hmm. So you have this moment of, how did I get here, you might ask? Well, it's a crazy story. You know?
Record scratch, yeah.
Yeah.
This is the beginning of the final chapter, chapter 10, represented as an X. You want to get into symbology?
I mean, this is very interesting, right? It's been numeral all the way until now, and now it's Roman numeral, it's an X. I mean, I think there's a finality to it. I don't know that it represents, to me at least, I could be wrong. I think it is open to interpretation. I think it just feels more final to have an X versus a 10. But I don't know. I'm interested to hear if you guys have other reads.
I'm sure there are, and I'm sure Dave is going to be like, no, it's not that deep, man. But
am I the curtains are blue guy? Is that what's going on here?
No. That's black and white, Dave. This is grayer than that. No, we've talked separately before about other outlets of analyzation where you've been like, I don't think it's that deep, and it's like, yeah maybe I kind of agree with you. But
I mean, it is a choice for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, what does X represent? It does represent finality, as Matt said. What is X but a cross on its side? that also represents this idea of religion, which is our past. What I thought, I had a misread of this. I misremembered the original chapter, which is chapter redacted, as being chapter X. So I had thought, oh, okay, this is like full circle. This is, we're completing the loop. But no such luck.
Well, it kind of is full circle, but not in that way.
Yeah, not in that way. Idiot, you're wrong.
Get him.
I am wrong. Before we find out why they're blowing things up again, we get some Principal flashbacks, and make no mistake here, Principal is a sympathetic character. Like, don't let the trappings of the government convince you that she is not. She really is. This whole thing, I don't think they set out for narcissism to be a core theme of this, but how it was represented in the game, how this idea of generational trauma, to use that phrase again, is depicted, it screams narcissism to me. And it seeing how Principal, the youngest, interacted with Iris sort of mirrors how a child goes through the process of wanting desperately to please and longing for and eventually resenting a narcissistic parent. I don't want to say it's one-to-one to me, but it's so close. You know, having seen this firsthand, I know how this goes. She was creating clones, Principal was, solely for the purpose to send the best of the best to Iris, to show her how much better she's gotten, and aren't my gifts good enough for you now? I'm constantly seeking approval, which ultimately led to a thirst for power, eventually overcoming what Iris never was to her, and thus eventually turning into Iris and turning into Clara and turning into Clara's mother. It's this cycle that's on repeat.
So the way that I saw this, and it took a while to come to this, but she definitely started out, in my opinion, with that desperate need to be forgiven and accepted by Iris and acknowledged for what she's doing. But I think, so I got to the point where I was starting to think, like, why were these events set in motion? Why would Principal interfere with that communion to begin the process of radicalizing Watcher against Iris? And there's a certain point where, in my opinion, Principal switched, because she tried for so many years to get her approval through sending the best of the best, that eventually she snapped and said, okay, the best isn't good enough for you. Well, now there's a new plan. And that's what I think happened. I think that she eventually said, okay, well, I'm going to start turning these people against you. And that's how I'm going to grab power. Like, this is not going to work. And eventually I have to do something else to, have control over what I'm doing. But those wounds are not healed, as we see in that play scenario. But it was interesting to me figuring out the why of Principal's plan when we see the original reason here, when she's going after acceptance. But that, I don't think, carried through the entire events of when Iris was alive.
Oh, totally. I agree 100% with you. But what I love about this is it's showing that even after Principal had become corrupted, and had lost her way, deep down, let's go back to the didactic truism that this game puts forth. Nobody is beyond forgiveness. It puts it forth until at the end you could just throw it away, but we'll get there.
Yep.
Nobody is beyond forgiveness. I mean, Principal is a result of nature, of nurture, not nature.
Yeah.
Right.
This is nature versus nurture is something that I don't think we've talked about, but like we kind of have.
When you have a society of clones, it's right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's both. Has to be. All this to say, I thought Principal was an extremely sympathetic character. I ended this game feeling very bad for her while also condemning what she chose to do.
Yeah. I think the idea of no one's beyond forgiveness also, the game also throws back at us, right? I mean, we just talked about it with Fixer, who clearly never forgave Watcher. And to be clear, doesn't mean that she doesn't love Watcher, because those are very different things. I think she deeply loves Watcher, which is why she never forgave her. And her heart was broken on some level, the nature of the relationship notwithstanding. And so I think that even to that end, this game is at odds with itself and its own messaging. Importantly, because it's not meant to be, like you said, and have said many times, it's not black and white, it's gray.
We do learn a little bit about Iris, and I forget which late chapter it's in, but I got the impression that Iris was not necessarily blowing off what Principal was sending to her, but that Iris was so busy. And Iris turns into a very tragic character at the end of this too, with what you learn what her late life was like before she got killed. Yeah. And how she basically, in order to satisfy the occupants, had to stay in this almost everlasting communion with them. So she didn't have time or attention or energy for literally anything else. And so it's this really tragic situation where, like, Principal is trying to please her. Iris literally cannot pay attention to it. And then eventually Principal snaps and goes off in a different direction.
Yeah. As somebody that's not a parent, maybe that's a commentary on what it's like to be one. Just never having that kind of time for anything. Did they ever say what happens? Did I make this up? Do the clones that get sent there to the other side, or the sisters that quote unquote graduate to the other side, chosen, do they just get incinerated?
I don't think they ever just straight up say what happens, but they don't come back, right?
Yeah.
They're gone.
Except for Fixer, who survived out there in the tunnels or something like that.
Yeah, it's not explicit, and it's clear the train does go to the All-Mother as Watcher does, but yeah, it is unclear what their fate is, but they don't come back. So I think you're meant to assume that they're killed somehow, and incineration seems to be the most common thing brought up.
Maybe. It's not, I don't know. I didn't mean to like derail it by bringing that up.
No, that's all right.
Derail.
It's a big question.
So blowing up the roof, that was not the original plan. It was a little more subtle, but I mentioned earlier, Nowhere eventually slips up. One of the guards named Mauve, who we have dubbed Mauve, that was watching Watcher at the time, notices that Nowhere is acting suspicious, so she rushes the top. She rushes in, shoots BB in the head, so she's dead. And at this point, Fixer says, all right, fuck it, we're changing the plan. And that's when she blows up the roof. As we are literally falling, Secretary flies in close enough to the other two and just immediately starts a mass communion. And when we're in there, they say, okay, we've got 5 minutes until you all hit the ground and die. So go for it. Do it. Do it up. And this is our last communion where we're playing as Secretary speaking to Source, who is the Earth occupant.
Yeah, this is fascinating. The amount of information we get, some of which was alluded to, and then others that like I'm completely blindsided by when it's spelled out, like things we could probably gauge and kind of finesse that then they just flat lay out, and it like about the occupants, about the occupation, why they came, some of the stuff we've already talked about, and then some more revelations on top of that.
After a couple chapters of like fairly easy to digest plot, the fire hose is open again with this last communion with the Source.
Yeah. To that end, please correct me if any of this is wrong. I don't want to rush to get to the end so we could really talk a little more about some of these big picture ideas, but also a lot of this kind of has been more or less explained. But anyway, correct me if I get any of this wrong. So the occupants, they were a race that lived entirely off of previous memories, and at one point they branched out on their own to form their own. And Earth, like we said, was not the only place to be affected, nor was Iris the only person to be affected. Source explains that when it tried communicating with humans here after it took a humanoid form, It saw itself for the first time, but when the humans began to try to communicate with it, with piano, specifically with culture, it saw it as discordance. It didn't perceive it as beauty. It hated the instrument, and that calls back to something we heard at the very beginning of the game, where who we thought was Iris was talking about hating the piano. They responded to this discordance in kind, which I took to meant the disease.
So there's a theory out there that I personally like, that the disease is the occupants responding in a way that humans can't handle.
That's what I saw.
The reason that people cry until they lose all the water in their body is because they've just been overwhelmed by this discordant form of communication from the occupants. And it, like the way they communicate, if it's a sharing of memories, maybe it's just too many, or things that don't fit together, and it breaks something inside of the people that experience it, or something like that.
I see.
Yeah, like my understanding of it, and this was the revelation I was talking about that absolutely floored me, is this idea that all the occupants are technically trying to do is respond and communicate in the way they know how, and that literally kills us because we can't handle it. And it's this idea that they flock to where emotions are strongest or like most darkest, and so they are using how they know to communicate. But to us, we interpret it as these massively strong, impactful, and overly emotional feelings that literally make us cry ourselves to death. Like, it just kind of made my jaw drop that they're just trying to talk to us, and we're dying, and they don't understand why. But they keep trying.
It's a profound extrapolation of this idea of some out-group, some other trying to communicate with an in-group, or just two groups that are not from the same culture, religion, place in general, trying to communicate and having that friction of not being able to, of not knowing how better to communicate whenever they're doing the best that they can. Anybody that's tried to speak to somebody in a different language has probably run into this. Like, I don't know how best, I'm not dumb, but I can't express it in a way that you would understand.
Yeah.
And it's just making both of us upset.
Yeah, and now just blow that up to a cosmic scale with these aliens that have perfect memory recall of every single memory that's ever happened on the Earth that they've been able to experience. I mean, I've heard accounts, some people, like famously Tim Rogers, has perfect memory recall, and he's talked about how it kind of sucks. But now blow that up to every single memory that's been experienced since the occupants have been here, and you could see how that would be overwhelming if that's what's actually like causing this.
Right. The idea that this disease, like, they didn't come here to take over, to kill us. They came here and wanted to reach out. But the only way they know how to reach out is with something that kills us. But they have no way to know that that's the result, right? They can't understand it. They can't understand that that's the one-to-one. It's just an action and a reaction to them. And in the same way that when you talk to, again, something that can't articulate, or like even a pet, like you repeat things to try and get it through, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And the fact that they just keep trying and we kept dying, it made my heart sink when I got to this part, because it's just tragic. It's no one, right? We talked about morality earlier. It's so easy to want to just hate the occupants because they're this evil invading alien race. And what this is revealing is that they're not. They maybe are still not doing things correctly, depending on your perspective, but they're not malicious. This is not a malicious intent, at least initially.
It does have a bit of that slant to it. Secretary will like call them murderers, call Source a murderer, and Source's response is,
Where there was once nothing, there was now plenty. He died. There is that word again. You murdered them. The transfer was lossless. And I remain.
which is how they refer to death. When things die, that to them, that is just memory being reborn into the collective unconscious, into the oneness of the universe. This is a philosophy that's seen everywhere. Zen, Buddhism, reincarnation, we see it everywhere. We went over why Iris was chosen, because she was adept at being mean to people, quite frankly. They do one more generational trauma line here with the source occupant saying you should be grateful, you don't understand. I don't like that here. I wish that would have... They're holding up the signs a little too frequently for me, especially as we're getting towards the end to this new idea. Let's just jump to the end. Actually, we're getting towards this new idea of resetting society. The whole reason that we're doing this is, one, to show everybody the whole truth, the entirety of the truth, unaltered by lenses or perspectives, but also to rebuild society anew. And we are now going to be given an opportunity to choose what we want to carry in our proverbial backpack into this new society. Now, what happens functionally is we complete the communion, the occupant catches us because we called one here, remember, and it scoops us up, and now we get to restart. What's not immediately clear until the end of the game is that this kind of resets the timeline because we see dead characters come back.
Mm-hmm.
What happens here is this ending. We can get a multitude of endings, notably only two that are good, which I don't, or good, quote unquote. I don't love that. We get to choose which groups we want to stay and which groups leave behind, that is, and which groups we bring into this new society with us. There is a flowchart on Steam that will show how to get all of these endings. If one light, these are positioned as everybody being under street lights, and you switch the lights on and off. So if the Zhao's light is off, check, or rather you get this ending. If it's on, check the sisters. If the sisters is off, you get this ending. On, check the next light, so on and so forth. Helpful resource. I recommend looking it up. But let's talk about these endings.
Yeah.
So which one did you two get just playing yourselves? Do you remember?
The gist, based on what I've read, is that I got the good ending. I think, if I can recall correctly, I turned off Knower, I turned off the youngest, and I turned off the red soldiers and a few others. I think it's hard to remember all of the factions, but I turned off the major, a lot of the major aggressors, and it gave me the ending where you get guided through as Blue and get to read these in-depth backstories of each of the characters who had passed, who had died.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially reading a bunch of headstones about what transpired after this moment and what's happening. And it was powerful. I was a little disappointed that it was just a tour to walk around and read, but I thought it was still well done for what it was. I don't mind that it was kind of it didn't really guide you. You had to just decide. It was based on your personal choice. But I also like that it does put you in the shoes of Blue for just a moment of well, what would you do if you could do this? Which I think is powerful.
For me, and I'll just tell you what I have so many thoughts about how this ending plays out, how multiple scenes of the ending play out. For me, the first time I played it, I turned the lights off on nobody. I left them all on.
Oh, wow.
Oh, the game doesn't like that.
No, it does not.
That's my biggest, I'm sorry. That's just my biggest gripe with this ending is that specifically, but please continue.
Okay. So with this specific ending, my rationale for leaving all the lights on is that the game had made such a point that you must acknowledge your past in order to move on, and that nobody's beyond forgiveness. And so to me, that was a very obvious answer, was everyone's coming to the new society because everyone can be forgiven and everybody has good in their heart. And even the villains that you thought were villains have so many layers of things going on that are, pushing them in these directions that it never crossed my mind to turn off the lights on Mauve. I don't know anything about Mauve and what Mauve's just doing her job. I didn't have the soldiers, the red soldiers, like we've heard this before, I'm just doing what my orders were, right? But like, I don't know.
Even if we don't want to use that excuse, we could also give them a more charitable read of they've been indoctrinated and they deserve a second chance.
Exactly. And then with Principal, like we know what's been going on with Principal. Principal's been through some shit. So like I took it to mean the very obvious answer to me that everyone deserves a new chance in the new world. As long as we're acknowledging the past, we can move forward. So what happens if you do that is as soon as the communion is ended, Mauve kills you right away. It is almost a non-standard ending. Like it doesn't feel like a real ending. What I think is going on here is the game had this theme for much of the playtime. The majority of the playtime was working with this theme. And then in one of the late chapters, chapter 8 or something like that, I think it was when all the collaborators showed up in the train station and we're all like, we're planning. And this is the time when you have all of these different factions and you start to get this political idea in your head. And so we have these parallel themes going on of a political statement that the creators are making and the theme of acknowledging, accepting, and moving on, working with your past in order to create a better future. But at the end here, the developers very clearly are saying the political statement is more important than the theme that is being set up, which is why this blindsided me when this turned out to be the wrong choice.
Yeah, a lot of what you said I agree wholeheartedly with. I think that was very well observed. Matt, just to put out what I got the first time, Matt, you had mentioned that you got one of the good endings. You got Epitaph Blue.
Yes.
My first initial ending, just going off of what I thought should be there. If you leave Mauve's light on, she kills you no matter what. Yeah. If you leave the red guard on, I want to come back to this in a second, they kill you no matter what. Executed, done. Interestingly, 1 or 2 don't matter. Like you can do whichever on your parents, which I thought was a very perplexing decision. But at any rate, the 2 quote unquote intended endings are the Epitaph Blue, where you turn the light off on Principal and Principal is no longer there, but Blue is. Or the ending that I got, Epitaph Red, where you turn the light, you keep the light on for Principal. I really don't think I turned the light off on Blue, but I know I got Epitaph Red for my first ending. So I don't know.
Epitaph Red, you just turn the light off on the Red Sisters and Mauve, and you leave everyone else on. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I was like, I sympathize with Blue. I wouldn't have done that. But functionally, Red and Blue are the same. You are still going to go around to... You are a POV of a Zhao type with question marks above the name tag. And it's very clearly Zhao's voice. So my first thought was, okay, why are these question marks? In retrospect, I think this might be the first signifier that we are resetting the timeline before we see the dead come back to life. Maybe. I don't know. But functionally, they're the same. In Epitaph Blue, Blue is guiding you around the orchard. Sorry,
I just had a big idea pop in my head. Continue.
I saw it.
Yeah.
I saw it.
But it's for later. It's not for now.
In Epitaph Red, Principal guides you around.
Right.
And it's functionally the same. The garden is now a memorial to where we can always come back and pay respects to the past, never forgetting it. But we have since moved on to the surface after Red and Blue, after you're done in the orchard. You do go out onto the surface as Blue. You take off your mask and you see Iris and the Ancient Sisters all on this beach. And, there's like waving and looking at one another, and that's a cut to credits. If you don't get one of those endings, if you get executed by Mauve or the Red Guard, you just get kicked back and made to do all of that over again, make the choices over again, which is why I have said, or we have said, that there are 2 intended endings. I want to just get my point out and stop talking. I feel bad for hogging the mic. What what frustrated me a little bit was, one, yes, what you said, Dave, leaving. I took to heart this idea that morality is so gray, nurture is so much more important than nature. Nobody is beyond forgiveness. So leaving the lights on, you're dead. The Red Guard, this one is interesting because they are painted as the de facto villains. If you have a charitable read of them, you could say, okay, they were indoctrinated, they were essentially brainwashed, they deserve a chance to live as themselves. If you go to turn their light off, when you turn the lights off of any of these, you get a little statement about their philosophy from Secretary.
Mm-hmm.
And the Red Guard says, a hammer when one is needed and when one isn't. Now, I think that is fascinating because that sets them up to be this sort of useful tool, that you don't always need. But I mean, if you need to hammer something and you don't have a hammer, it really sucks. And I took that as signifying that while this tool was misused in the past, a fresh start, nobody is beyond forgiveness, can possibly remedy the situation, and we can learn to use this tool anew. The game does not agree with that because if you leave their light on, you all get executed. They firing squad you.
Mm-hmm.
And that frustrates me a little bit because I thought that it now, like you said, maybe both of you said, I apologize, Matt, if you said this and I am just have forgotten in this brief time. But what's frustrating is it now feels like it's in combat with itself thematically. Like it now wants to say something different or maybe a little bit askew than what it was naturally trending towards.
Yeah, like I said, I think that it was trending toward that conclusion that I made, and then the developers at the end, they want the takeaway to be that in order to build the new society, the just society in the future, the place that we all want to live in, you need to leave behind the authoritarian sector of this. You cannot take that with you. I don't know enough about politics to put a label on it, but well,
that's a good word though, but
yeah.
it carries such weighted emotional weight,
right?
Authoritarian. And I'm not, look, I'm going to get out ahead of this because this is the internet. I'm not defending authoritarianism. Hard stop. But if we ditch that word for a moment, then we could see how this is thematically confused. If we keep that word, though, then the Hong Kong protests make sense.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
That's where I'm coming from with this, because it's very clear.
There's the friction.
Yeah. It's clear that history, to me, it's clear that history, that real world history, informs what they think the right choice at the end of the game is.
Matt, I'm very self-conscious that we're taking the mic from you.
No.
Please weigh in.
Please, I am not gun shy about yapping. I think that it's funny, you guys talk about how it feels in conflict with the message, and I never gave it a second thought. And I don't want to over-personalize it, but I think some of my own background informed that. Being Jewish, being queer, being non-binary, and being faced with what seems so obviously coded as authoritarian, to me, it seemed like the obvious answer to turn that off. The dictator, who seems to have, though being sympathetic, became a monster, at least in your eyes as this character for sure. Obviously, we don't want to take them with us. And I guess maybe I didn't see the clear analog of, if we don't learn from our history, we're doomed to repeat it. To me, it just seemed like, well, if we want to reboot society, who do we want to be joining us in that adventure? Definitely not the evil army. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong or what, but I will agree that it's murky. But I think for me, the reason I didn't give it a second thought is because to me, the characters read so clearly as flawed but unforgivable that I decided to just not forgive them in that moment. And that's how I made that choice, even though the game is going, well, we should forgive everybody. Because I, as Matt Storm, a human on Earth, don't think everyone is worthy of forgiveness. And I think that informed my choice, me imposing myself on it.
Yeah. So separating my decision and my following of that other theme out of it and just looking at like, okay, the developers clearly say these people have to go. That makes a lot of sense to me to, like you said, not take the evil army, not take the dictator. That makes sense to me. It just, like Rick said, and I agree with Rick, it's in conflict with other themes that the game was really strongly, moving with.
Right.
But that's part of what makes this game, and drawing it to another episode that we've worked on together, Matt, Celeste.
Yeah.
That's what makes works like this so important, is that more so here than in Celeste, but I'm going somewhere with this. Here, there's no right answer on how to deal with this. There's, whether it is political philosophy or societal philosophy, anthropology, being a mother, being a sister, being a child, there's no handbook on what is right and what is wrong. This is something that for good and for ill, we all must contend with. And whether we are a child to a biological parent, an adoptive parent, to a mentor, a sister, a brother, a sibling, whatever the case may be, we must contend with this in real life and learn for ourselves. There is no right answer. But like Celeste, approaching this game, this game paints so many messages in a way that are broad-reaching. Celeste, famously, Maddie Thorson says, yeah, you can learn a message from a trans work without being trans. It's bigger than that.
Yeah.
Who cares? I think it's like, yes, Maddie is trans. So what? That's not the point. That's not the grand point. And so too is here. We can read into this work on subsequent playthroughs and as different people, and bringing our own life experiences to it. It's going to color things in a different way. And because there's really no wrong answer, even if the Red Guard is maybe put forth as the one wrong answer, which is, if it's going to be any of them, yeah, it's the Red Guard for sure. We can still, I almost got derailed there. There's listeners can't see it, but the sun is rising in my view, and it's about to my eyes. I'm gonna have to adjust my seat in a second here, but we can glean new seeds of interpretation are planted every time we go through these. Whether we are at a different place in our lives, whether we are speaking with people who have different perspectives from ours, and that's what makes works like these so beautiful and so enriching and so worth going through a second time, a third time, a fourth time.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a couple other things about like the endings that play out after you make your choice that I thought were interesting. The first one being in the blue and red ending, when you're playing as the Jow going around the orchard, reading the epitaphs are different in those endings.
Yeah.
That's right.
They're in the ending where principle is your guide. The epitaphs are not very reverent of the sisters that were part of the uprising, we'll say.
Yeah.
Whereas in the one where blue is the one guiding you through there, they're very reverent towards everybody who took place in building the new society. And I thought that, we've had a couple times where we've talked about, who gets to dictate what history is taught. And this is the final time where they touch on that, where, Principal's still probably powerful here. She's the one, she looks like the Final Fantasy character when you get to this ending scene here.
Yeah. Is there anything to be made of with that?
I honestly have no idea. It might just be the idea that a lot of time has passed and, advancements in fancy dress or something like that.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting. These epitaphs are different depending on who's writing the history.
Yeah. It's that idea that a history is written by the victor and it will always be colored by those eyes.
Yeah.
There is no well, I'd say in most cases, there's no true accounting of history, just the perspective that's most widely spread. The only people who know really what happened were the ones who were there, right? Firsthand accounts. And even then, those can be altered. Those people have opinions, perspectives, thoughts. And this really showcases it very starkly if you play both of those endings.
And it's interesting, too, because in the ending where Principal is there, Blue doesn't have to be dead. Like you could have brought Blue forward into the new society with you, but Principal is still the dominating force once you get to that point in the future where the Zhao is visiting. So Principal's the one telling the story still.
I know in the last episode I had mentioned that I wanted to put a pin in a conversation we were having about, I think to put it simply is Iris's mother at fault? I think is sort of how it was phrased. I think we kind of talked about that enough to get our general views on nature versus nurture out there. Dave, I know that was a point that you had brought up. Do you feel comfortable with how you've expressed those ideas here? If you want to revive that discussion, we certainly can. But I think, as far as my position goes, I think I've kind of summarized everything that I feel.
There's actually a really interesting way that conversation about Iris's mother and then Iris as a mother ties into the ending, the very ending cutscene here, where in the blue and red endings, you see the ship rise above the surface. Blue walks out, takes her mask off, looks down and sees Iris and the original sisters on the beach. I don't think this is real. This is a figurative seeing of Iris and the sisters on the beach.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And it is a part of the collective memory. The people who pass on live on in our memories. And now Iris has finally come back home here at the end. But the way that this ties in with Iris's mother is Iris and her mother have a conversation in a stairwell in one of these really late chapters. And they talk about motherhood. They talk about it. This is one of my favorite conversations in the game, where Iris basically is like just letting out all of her frustrations with now having to care for these original sisters. And she asks her mom, I'll summarize, but she asks her mom something like, how do you live with this? And her mom just basically says, you just do what you can every day. And so that was what her mom was doing. And now that's what Iris was trying to do. She eventually ran away from the sisters. So like she did that. But they had this talk about motherhood, and then you see them on the beach at the very end. And it's almost to me like, in a very figurative way, Iris has like completed her goal of taking care of her kids. Like they're home in a way, like they have made it. The goal, it's complete. The journey's complete. And so this like tying all back together with Iris and motherhood and the way her relationship with her mom has affected at least the way that she views the other characters. And I'm not going to get into like her mom was this way to her and that connects to how she was with the other characters. But like your experiences inform the way that you interact with other people. So it is there for sure. But that's the way that I saw this ending. And I thought that it might be a big stretch, but to me, it was almost like Iris finally accomplished what she wanted to as a mother by bringing them home.
Yeah, I saw it the same way as well. And I think even a little bit one step further to make it kind of meta and science fiction-y, Iris is the mother of all these children, but quite physically, they are clones of her. They aren't even her children. They are clones. They are her. So technically, Blue coming home means Iris has come home because Iris is Blue. And that's also how I read it, is like the reason Iris and the original sisters are there is because they are in all of these clones, because they are all clones. They are identical physically, at least DNA wise, they are the same. And so I read it even one step further on that level to that end. Yeah.
Well, I think regardless of whether this is metaphorical, a representation, or science fiction-y literally happening, this homecoming theme is valid no matter what.
Yeah.
And saliently said by both of you, I agree completely. I love homecoming themes. They're some of my favorite in any kind of media. I think the reason that I locked into this being literal was because at this point, I was so, especially after the communion with Secretary and Source, I was so far in the mind space of, okay, this is science fiction at this point. they're resetting the society. Everything is getting a hard reset. This must just be like everybody's back. Everybody's back. We're all here, or whoever we've decided to bring, of course. Which I think matters because I think if you turn off the sisters and Iris, does Iris have a streetlight? I can't remember.
I don't believe so, but I don't remember.
I think if you turn off the sisters, the ancient sisters spotlight, you don't get the good endings. I think you get a different ending.
I would hope so. Like, I was kind of surprised to go back and look at the different endings and realize that there weren't as many as I thought there would be. Like, I thought there would be a lot more different ways this could go depending on who you left and who you took with you. And I think it probably just boils down to this is an indie team who can't do it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I was happy with the number of them. I'm not upset that the two quote unquote good endings were functionally the same either. I think they are subtly different enough to make them both worth seeing.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially with the different epitaphs and just the different tones that Principal and Watcher, Principal and Blue take. Blue sees the orchard as a place to visit from time to time, to never forget where one has come from, to honor the past. Principal, youngest, honors it by staying there.
Yeah.
She sees you off and she says, "No, I'm here. I've always been one for nostalgia. This is my place."
Mm-hmm.
So they're subtly different enough to be very interesting, I think. I don't know. I thought that I saw a couple of complaints online, like on Reddit or something, like these are too similar.
I mean, also games
Kinda, not really though.
Games don't owe you multiple endings. And so many games we play have an ending. But I think that but I can see where Dave's coming from. The fact that they give you so many things to turn on and off does hint at the idea that there would be a lot of variables, because there are a lot of on and off switches, right? But
I wonder what happens if you turn off the jowls, because you play as a jowl later.
You if the jowl light is off, this is like the one part of the flow chart I saw that I remember, you get a hard ending, like a no credits ending.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because they have to be there in order for that ending to make sense. Yeah. I mean, I think that ultimately, while maybe the dismount isn't perfect, I do appreciate how this ending takes shape. I do agree that the binary of on-off can feel trivial, but I think because I, at least in my first playthrough, followed my gut, so to speak, I was satisfied. But I can see how other people like going, well, what if I try this? What if I try that? Being a little more disappointed. But because I just went, well, these feel bad to me, I'm going to get rid of those. Oh, I got this good ending. Like, it just felt fairly natural to me. So I didn't give it a second thought as much until we discuss it now. And I can see those other perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Which is why, like, I was blindsided and kind of disappointed in what my first ending was, for all the reasons I talked about before. But it's why I still think that the whole package of the ending of the game is still really strong and really affecting, provided that you did the right decision, because there is much more to the ending than just how did this society turn out. There's actually a lot more going on here. Yeah,
agreed. You can also turn off all of the lights. That's an option to you. Mm-hmm. That gets you the Scorched Earth ending. That's actually the only one that I did not check out before recording this, unfortunately.
Scorched Earth.
Yeah, that's the achievement, that how it's titled anyway.
Oh, okay. As in Scorched Earth, no survivors. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you turned all the lights off. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think
nobody's home.
I really do love the way this kind of wraps up. I think that they do rush it a little bit, but also, as Dave said, they are an indie team with limited resources, and I think it gobsmacks me how brilliantly they dismounted considering all the variables, and it can very easily, something this lofty could easily get lost, and I don't feel like it ever does, even if not everything hits as hard as the other things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Well, that is 1000 times resist. That gets you to the end, and you can certainly replay it if you'd like. You can load a save right as you're turning on and off the street lamps as well, if you wish. So you can see all of these endings, no problem. What a game. I mean, this is terrific. This is a hell of an opening from this studio, from Sunset Visitor, and I think anything that they come out with next is certainly going to be a day one buy from me.
No, I agree. Studios with debuts like this, you've just earned a fan for life. If I can be this affected, and also it's just the way this game is talked about. It's my favorite kind of game. We've done an episode on Fun and Games about. By the time you hear this, it'll have been out for a month or so. How do you recommend a game where you're trying to obfuscate narrative hooks because you want that to be a surprise? And while I know Dave comes from the philosophy you just tell people why it's great, within reason, within spoiler reasons. I love being able to obfuscate that stuff, recommending Before Your Eyes by saying, it's an hour and a half, just play it. Well, why? What's it about? Doesn't matter, just play it. I love being able to do that. There's no right way to recommend, but I like recommending this way, and this game is a poster child for that. Like, play 1000 times resist. Why? It's incredible. Just do it. You'll thank me. And so far, that recommendation has worked. And it doesn't work with every game, but with a game like this, as long as as long as you set the tone, it's narrative. If you like visual novels or just heavy story games, you will love this. Go play it. I don't think you can ever go wrong. And I every time a game like this comes out, I will play it, and I will probably love it as long as it's done well, because of this kind of storytelling.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback on that, if anyone is out there listening to this and you haven't played it, you just listen to it because you love pixelprojectradio, because you have great taste in podcasts, and you're thinking like, well, I know the story, I don't need to play this. I actually think that having these things in mind, starting a new game with context, is super additive for this game. I started a new game immediately after finishing it, and I was blown away by all the stuff that was there in the first couple chapters that I just didn't know what to think of the first time I saw them. And so this is one of those games that even if you are thoroughly spoiled, it's still got a lot for you.
Yeah, I love games like that. I mean, I watched a full playthrough and spoilerific discussion of Undertale before ever playing it once. And it didn't hinder that playthrough.
Wow.
It didn't hinder, I knew everything. I knew the ending, I knew the meta stuff, I knew all of it. And it just made me want to experience it myself more. And I still made choices that freaked me the hell out, even knowing the kinds of effect it would have. And that, I think, is proof that spoilers can suck, especially if they're thrust upon you against your will. But I don't think they're the end-all be-all for good storytelling. Good stories will transcend spoilers. And I agree with Dave. This game absolutely does that. I think you can still get so much out of this game, even knowing all of the narrative hooks and twists.
Yeah, hear, hear. Hear, hear. If you're listening to this and you haven't played the game, definitely check it out. I mean, all of the breadcrumbs are there from the beginning. If you know everything about the story and you start a new game, you'll see Blue in that opening cutscene.
Yep.
When Iris is killed. She's been there the whole time, along with many other breadcrumbs that you'll pick up along the way. Totally recommend. A recommend from each of us. Check it out. It's generally pretty cheap. It runs perfectly well on whatever platform you're playing on, whether it is PC, Switch. They have said no plans for PS5 as of yet, but they are open to it should funding come their way. So maybe in the future, hopefully, because, I want more people to experience this. So check it out. If you like this, if you like Evangelion, if you like Einstein on the Beach minimalism, check out this game. Highly recommend. So Dave, Matt, thank you for joining me again. Dave, you are from Tales from the Backlog. Matt, you are from Fun and Games Podcast. Listeners that are here likely heard part 1. You know all about them and you know where to find them. Have either of you done anything new on your respective shows since the last time we've recorded?
I mean, Dave is 8 months ahead, so he's done so much.
I've recorded lots of podcasts, yeah. So I think, this, by the time people hear this, I think the August episodes will all be out or close to all be out. So there is a very special episode about Animal Well that is another game that came out on the same day as 1000xRESIST. That there's a lot of good discussion to be had about what that game's doing too. So there's an episode about Animal Well, and then Pony Island coming up in September, Final Fantasy IV. There's some stuff to get excited about.
Yeah, for me, I mean, we have some cool stuff happening in September. I don't think I've officially announced it anywhere. And by the time you hear this, it's probably already out, so it's old news. But friend of this show, Eric, guest from the Unlockables, is going to be joining myself and Jeff to do a Game Boy Advance retrospective over on Fun and Games.
Ooh, love
And so
Eric.
Yeah, and so that's going to be a lot of fun. And then also, by the time you hear this in September, Jeff and I will have already gone to and come back from PAX West. We love covering those live events. It's a lot of fun. So we'll have a bunch of developer interviews, first impressions, games we got to see. And if all goes well, we'll be joined by the indie informer Jill Grote for that episode. So
Nice.
Some stuff to look forward to there.
Yeah, look forward, we do. Make sure you all check them out. You can find their links in the description to both Tales from the Backlog, all of Dave's stuff, and Fun and Games, and all of Matt's stuff. Their socials, Discords, everything that you need. It'll be in there. As well, you'll also find the sources. Actually, no, I think for this part 2, I'll probably just copy and paste the sources from part 1, because nothing's changed. I didn't have time to do any additional research, unfortunately. I tried, I just couldn't. I just reviewed what I already had. You'll find all of the links to Pixel Project Radio in there as well. You can find links to the Discord, which is where you'll want to go to join in for the discussion on this game, as well as the community forum if you want to participate in that. You can find the Patreon if you are interested in supporting the show and getting some minor perks that come with that. You can check that out at patreon.com/pixelprojectradio. And if you are interested and so inclined, you can also rate and review the show. I don't have any new no new reviews for this episode to read, but if you are so kind as to submit them, I will read them, even if they are a little bit critical. Haven't had that happen yet, but, the day is coming, I'm sure. So Dave is shaking his head yes.
Well, you
Dave.
do enough podcasts, somebody's going to get inspired to
You're going to get a
disagree
1-star
loudly.
review from some a-hole at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's inevitable. Thank you both once again for joining me. It's been a great discussion. I hope you all check out this game. If by some weird coincidence Sunset Visitor checks out these episodes, wow. But also, fans for life over here. Thank you for making an amazing work. And until next time, stay tuned for the next mini-series on Pentiment, coming out in real time just next week. So thanks, folks. Until next time, I'm Rick, your host as always. We're signing off for now. Take care.